Is the church prepared to minister to individuals with addictions? In this episode, we will talk about the church's role to respond to the fentanyl crisis. Welcome back to the Fentanyl Close to Home crisis. I'm in the Southeastern Conference studios with Pastor Hall. Welcome, Pastor Hall.
Hey, it's great to be here, Dr. Sankey. And we are excited for another episode of dealing with this fentanyl crisis close to home. But first of all, I want to say that we are educators. We are not doctors. We're not therapists. We're not addiction recovery specialists. But this is for information that I believe will help better our community in terms of a crisis that we are dealing with. Dr. Sankey, this fentanyl situation is still something that's plaguing our community across this nation right now. Would you say so?
Absolutely. And I would say not only our communities, but in our churches as well.
Absolutely. And think about it. We have thousands of churches across the United States. And with so many churches and storefronts and these beautiful buildings and these mega multi-million dollar churches, what happens if someone walks into one of our churches on a given weekend and they declare that we are dealing with this monster called fentanyl? How do we even begin to understand that?
Well, you know, that can be a challenge because in our churches, oftentimes we do not talk about addiction. We avoid the subject, and many times we think there's only one way to address the issue. So someone may come to a pastor and may disclose that they have an addiction problem, and many times we are not well equipped to address that issue. We may say, I'm going to pray for you. We know that prayer works. But what we do know that there are other things that the church can do to help address this fentanyl addiction crisis.
And I believe that there are some practical things that clearly the church has a responsibility as we minister in our community. We are indeed change agents in our community as members of local congregations. And so we must be equipped. And we're going to get into some of those areas, and we're going to talk about why the church has a given responsibility to respond to those who are dealing with this monster, as I would call it, called fentanyl. So think about it. What can we do as a church starting out, and why should we even be involved with someone that's addicted to this substance called fentanyl?
Oh, that's a really good question. What I would say is that we had not only saved souls, but we want to save lives. So what we do know about fentanyl is a very powerful drug. And if someone takes it, we know that they're at risk of maybe losing their life with just taking that drug. So when we talk about the church's role in the addiction, it's really important to understand the drug that we're dealing with. Understand that sometimes addiction comes from various reasons, pain, trauma, and so it's really understanding how it maybe came about so that we can respond appropriately to that issue. So you're right, it's very important for us not to turn our head away, but look at it head on to see how we can advocate for those individuals and minister to them. Their spiritual need, their emotional, their physical needs. It's really important that we pay attention to what our role is individually and then collectively.
Dr. Sankey, you brought out something very critical, and I don't want to just rush over that. You talked about that some of the reasons why people are addicted to fentanyl is trauma. Let's stop there for a moment. You mentioned pain, but let's start with trauma. How is it that trauma sometimes introduces a person to fentanyl usage?
Well, you know, I think that it could introduce them to fentanyl use, alcohol use, any other abuse, right? To a substance. And many times people are trying to cover or mask or to reduce the hurt from what they've gone through. It could be simple as, not simple, but it could be that they've experienced pain, whether they childhood, experiences.
Right.
Adverse childhood experiences is one of those things that we're hearing a lot about. I would add, there's adult adverse experiences, things that have happened in someone's adulthood. Maybe a loss of a loved one, a loss of a child, maybe they've been in even, as we know, a war is going on right now. There's family members who have loved ones overseas. And so sometimes they're just trying to cope, and they may be using alcohol or fentanyl to mask the pain, to ease the pain or the hurt.
I understand that we clearly live in a sinful world, a broken world, and because of a sinful, broken world that we're in, clearly there's trauma. And if we've not faced trauma, we will face trauma at some point in time. But talk to me about pain, because that's one of the areas too that sometimes introduces a person to fentanyl. So what about pain? How does pain come into play here?
You know, pain is so subjective. We can't see it, but a person can experience. So if they go to the doctor and experience they're having back pain, they may, prescribe them something for the back pain. And if that particular prescription doesn't seem to ease the discomfort, then maybe they may go to something more. And doctors now, they're very regulated on what they can give and how long they can give a medication. So if you can't get it from the doctor, but you know it's available on the street or from a family member, it's very possible someone may become addicted because of pain. It could be any type of pain.
And young people, let's bring our young people in here. Sometimes our young people are introduced to fentanyl by peer pressure.
Absolutely.
Peer pressure is something that's very real. And because of that, talk about how peer pressure, even in church, sometimes, not just outside of church, but inside of church, how does peer pressure play into this factor?
It's interesting that you mentioned children and young people and how they're introduced to it. Sometimes it could be as simple as I go for a dental procedure. The doctor gives me something to relieve the pain, because it can be painful to have dental procedure. And once those pills are gone, if I know that I'm still having pain, or they made me feel good, that euphoric experience, I may seek it out another place. I may seek it or talk about it among my friends. And some friends, if they have family members who have medication, that's why you want to make sure you always secure narcotics. They shouldn't be in a cabinet on our counter. They really should always be secure, because you never know who's in your home and how they may have access to it. So peer pressure of saying, you know what, explaining how they felt when they took it.
Right.
I mean, they paint that beautiful picture. Again, that can actually have individuals influence their peers to begin taking the medication as well.
So you talked about trauma. We looked at pain.
Yes.
Is there anything else perhaps on your list that we can look at that can perhaps cause a person to be introduced to fentanyl?
Well, they do talk about biological. Sometimes if you have a family member or a child has been born from someone who has a drug addiction, sometimes in their system, I mean, we have children who have been born that they've had to be detoxed because they had it in their system already. Environmental conditions, but I would say trauma, pain, sometimes high levels of stress. You'll find individuals who work in high stressful jobs. On the weekend, they're just, they really indulge because now they can escape just for the weekend.
Right.
And then they'll get themselves together to really go get back in the saddle or begin to work again as the week comes. So this fentanyl thing, and they'll come to church with it as well. I do know that individuals will come to church just to be under the influence, and we want them there. We want them to know that they belong there.
Absolutely.
We want them to know that we see the person. We don't see the problem, we don't see the addiction. We see the individual as a soul that we can save and a life that we can also save.
But Dr. Sankey, let me look at something here. Thousands of churches across this country right now. Many of our churches, we have dedicated, committed, born-again Christians that are committed to God, and there's no addiction problem. How do we even begin to understand the empathy or the sympathy that we need to feel for those that are addicted?
Well, I love what the Bible verse says in Galatians 6:2. Talks about carrying one another's burdens. And so if we start carrying one another's burdens, that fulfills the law of God. So sometimes we think it's just your problem or my problem, but it's our problem. If we recognize that there's someone in our congregation, among the believers, or in our communities that has a problem, it becomes our responsibility to become involved.
Absolutely. Because the church must become a center of care that reaches out as Christ would do to the community to help ease pain and suffering. So the church then does have a role
Absolutely.
as it relates to this whole fentanyl crisis. So what would be one of the first things if someone walks into our church, or it becomes known that among our membership that there's someone that's struggling or within a family there's someone struggling with this fentanyl situation, how do we approach that? How do we begin to deal with it?
You know, we're really not fully equipped. I'm going to just be honest. The church is not fully equipped, and I think that's why this is why we're having this conversation. How do we equip the church? But we can start with love and compassion. That's easy. You don't need any special training to show Christ-like love and compassion. Of course, we want to pray for that individual, but the most important thing is when we show love and care and concern, that draws people to Christ. You know, our goal is really to get them closer to Christ during this fentanyl crisis. That should be our main approach.
Okay. And one of the things, showing Christ-like compassion, not pity,
That's
but
right.
compassion, which is definitely something that is very critical. There's some other things that we can look at as well. One of the things that I thought about, I want you just to expound on for just a minute, is to acknowledge the person, not the problem.
Yes.
Think about that one. Acknowledge the person and not the problem.
Yes.
Expound on that one a little bit.
Oh, for sure. For sure. We want to make sure that we look at the person, seeing them as a soul that Christ died for. We know sin is a problem. We all struggle with sin, some sin or another sin. And because Christ came to redeem us, we want to see the person just as he saw us. We see them and see what resources can we have to help them through this crisis. So the church does have an important role to see the person, to provide resources, to provide support, to help them through that struggling problem. So yes.
And I love a statement that I've came across some time ago that says that when Christ walked this earth, he saw every human being as a person that was worthy of salvation.
Absolutely.
And I think we've got to see every individual as a person that's worthy of salvation. But we must also do something else, and that is connect the person to resources. So the church should be connected in such a way in the community to where we're able to connect that person to resources, because there are certain medical or biological components that perhaps we are not equipped to deal with, but by connecting them to those sources in community, then they can get the help they need, because we clearly can provide the spiritual resources from the church's perspective.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. I think as we think about Christ's compassion and the resources, we must practice patience, because oftentimes with addictions, there is a relapse that can happen. And there are times that we may not understand why and how it happened, but we want to make sure that we affirm the individual that with God's help, that we're going to stand beside them, we're going to support them, we're going to help connect them to the resources that they need. And so it's really important that we become very practical in what we do. So I know we have more to talk about the resources, and we have more to talk about the support that we can provide. And when we come back from our break, we will talk about those resources in detail, as well as the support that you and I can provide to those individuals.
Thank you so much for that point that you've just made. And we're going to continue this conversation right after the break when we come back. Welcome back to part 2 of this presentation dealing with the response to the fentanyl crisis from the church's perspective. The church is indeed a spiritual entity, and unless the church somehow gets involved, I believe that it's only part of the solution to the broader problem of this fentanyl addiction. Dr. Battles, we are so thankful that you gave such in-depth information concerning our first part. And I believe that the church clearly has a response to the fentanyl addiction to reflect Christ. So let's get into how the church can reflect Christ as someone that's struggling with the fentanyl addiction.
Well, first thing I would say is that people with addictions or individuals with addictions, they belong in church.
Oh, that's I
I would
love that.
say that. And the reason is because Christ is there. And so there are people at our churches who we know that have love and care and compassion for everyone. And so our Christ-like behavior is really, number one, would start with confidentiality. I mean, nowhere in the Bible did Jesus expose anyone. In fact, he would let people tell their own story. So it's important that we protect their privacy, we keep our information confidential, what we know about them, provide support, walk alongside them. It could be simple as going to the support group with them, offering to take the children, offering to provide a meal while they're going through. Because remember, when you're in an addictive state, you're not at your best. You're not at your best. So you're going to need someone to walk alongside you, to show that you love them and care for. So practical help. You know, may I pick up the children? You know, can I go with you? So those are things that we can do. That's Christ-like behaviors.
And that gives strong support to the family because
Oh, yes.
a person that's addicted to any addictive substance, there's going to clearly be an impact, a very negative impact to the family. And so to support the family, that helps in this whole process, the journey to wholeness again. But talk to me about compassion, because Christ showed compassion to those that he came in contact with. So talk to me about compassion. How can the church show compassion
Well, you know,
compassion to an addiction?
Even just starting out with listening. I mean, everyone has a story, and sometimes knowing the story, hearing the story, can actually generate that compassion. Oftentimes when we hear someone's story, we can connect or relate in some way, maybe not individual, but we've heard, encounter people with very similar stories. So that's one way as well, listening, and then gentle and humility. Were it not for grace, it could have been you, it could have been me, it could have been any of us. So again, we have to realize that their story is their story. And what we do know is they don't have to stay where they are. We can help them on that journey to get closer to Christ.
But there's something else. It's called the ministry of presence, where we show our presence. What about showing presence to those that's going through an addictive situation? How do we deal with that?
You bring up a really good question. Let me tell you why. Because the addiction recovery process is not the same for everyone. Some people just say, I'm not doing it anymore, and they stop. Others say, I'm not doing it, I'm not going to use any drugs or any substance, and they go on for months and months and months, still struggling with it. So I think of the Bible verse that says, don't become weary in well-doing, because that presence means that you're going to be present with them consistently. It's not just a one-time, like, I'm glad to see you at church today, or welcome back. It's that consistent showing an interest in someone, sitting quietly, listening to the story, affirming their good, their strengths, what they do well. So that presence is really critical. That's what Jesus did.
So it's really walking with them. It's like a journey, walking with them on a journey, because it is a journey to sobriety.
It is.
And as we do that, what about if they relapse? How do we address that?
Oh, I think with compassion. I'm sorry that this has happened, that you've have felt like you need to go back to that. But I think many times when we want people to move away from addictions, we need to give them something to do to fill their time with what they would normally be doing with an addiction. So let's think about the church. There's many ministries that one of the things that we can do is get them involved quickly. Community services, praying, reading. So again, their spirituality should be growing as they're growing away from the addiction or recovering from the addiction. And so there's things in church that they can do and should be able to do that we would invite them to participate in, so that we can fill that void of them feeling. Because remember, the drug gives them euphoric, make them feel good, raise their self-esteem. So if they're involved in church activities, that can also do that.
Right. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, and that is confidentiality. Confidentiality is very important. And I say that because as I speak to those who are listening, I remember pastoring a congregation, and someone who had been addicted before, but they had been clean for several years, came and asked to use our facilities, or at least a portion of our facilities, to be able to do weekly support group meetings. We gave them their space. We didn't go back there uninvited. And so I believe we must clearly give them their space. But that brings me to something else, and that is prayer. How important is prayer in the recovery of an addict?
Oh my, we know that prayer is the solution to every problem. We know that. When we say that we're going to pray for them, we sincerely should pray specifically about them being, freed or have the desire to not to have the desire to continue to using substances. But prayer is not the only thing. We want to take action. So we pray with them, we encourage them, but again, we take action. And we do it prayer in such a way, humility, not preaching at them while we're praying that they have this problem, but praying in such a way that we want them to be drawn closer to Christ as a result of, that interaction with us.
What I'm really hearing you say is that in dealing with any addict, we've got to reflect the character of Christ.
Absolutely.
And that's what Christ did. He respected individuals. He respected their dignity, their humility. He respected them not only in some of these things that perhaps others wanted to know, but he respected their confidentiality, I guess is what you said earlier. And he walked along with them on a journey. And we see many stories in the Bible where the final product was one who connected themselves with Christ, and they became a chain agent as well. Talk to me about connecting an individual to resources, because resources are very critical as well.
I agree. Many times people think the pastor has all the answers.
You mean to tell me that the pastor does not have all of the answers?
Well, he has answers of how to refer people. So I think sometimes people may not understand that the pastor may not be equipped to do counseling. But what we're hoping, Pastor Hall, is in our churches that we will know what is that pathway that we can direct individuals. Ideally, we would love to have our churches trained and equipped to be able to help individuals on site. Sometimes that's not possible.
Right.
So I think the resources that we want to be able to refer them to, especially if there's a crisis, we want to make sure that we know that crisis number. Sometimes we want to make sure that we can directly tell them, call this number. And the National Drug Helpline, there's a helpline, is 1-844-289-0879. And I'll repeat that because sometimes someone's in a crisis at church. They may actually have a fentanyl crisis at church, and we want to make sure that we know how to respond to that. And we're not experts at that.
Absolutely.
But we want to make sure there's resources. And that number again is 1-844-289-0879. There's times that people are in a crisis and they may be suicidal. They may have even come to church. And that number is a little shorter. And that number is 988. Dial it on your phone. Someone will come on the line and help talk through the process. So we must pay attention to the people in the pews.
So in our response to this fentanyl crisis, there are those who are within the church that somehow are secretly dealing with by themselves sometimes, and sometimes within a family, and there's the stigma. And I want to stay a moment on that word stigma. There's a stigma attached to addiction, to alcohol use, but especially we're talking about the fentanyl.
That's correct.
So sometimes people don't come forward, members don't come forward because there's a stigma attached. I love what you said earlier, and that is that we must show the love of Jesus Christ, that regardless of what the challenges of a human being is, if we show the love of Christ, we're going to be willing to come alongside of that person and walk with them through this whole process of becoming clean again.
I think that stigma that you're talking about is critical because I may not have an addiction, but if my child or my niece or my nephew or some family member has an addiction, many times we're not as eager to invite them to come to church.
What you're really saying then is that all of us are broken because of sin.
Oh, absolutely.
My problem might not be drugs or alcohol or the fentanyl situation. My problem could be something else, but all of us are still broken human beings. And because we're broken human beings, we need the grace and mercies of God, and we need to come alongside of those that are struggling, especially with this killer that is killing so many people. The stats are clearly telling us we have individuals in this country dying every day from fentanyl, and there are more coming, and including young people, and they're putting this stuff, this garbage I would call it, in all kinds of things that's very addictive, and because of that, it's so addictive that it becomes a challenge to overcome this. And so the church must be involved, because I believe that Christ becomes the answer to all of our problems. Not saying that there should not be practical solutions. There are practical solutions, but if Christ is not a part of the solution, then there's a great chance of relapse again. When a person connects himself with Christ, then they got a greater chance of remaining sober as well for a long time to come.
You know what's exciting to me is there's actually a Steps to Christ book for addiction recovery. So it actually has the same chapters, but it refers to the addiction habits throughout each chapter. That book can be found on Advent Source. It's a really great book. I've gone through it. It's a teaching tool. And that's a resource that we can use. I mean, you and I are a resource. We just went through the Journey to Wholeness training, the facilitator training. That 12-hour course that we went through has equipped us to actually train other individuals. And at that training, we had 70 plus people. So we have 70 plus people across Southeastern Conference combined with Florida Conference who are well equipped to be facilitators.
And what I'm hearing you say, Dr. Battles, is that clearly there should be resources within the local church. Yes, we connect with resources outside of our church walls, but there should be resources from within our church. And maybe there might be a combination of resources within our church connecting with resources out of the church that can make a difference in a person's life, that could mean the difference between life and death.
Amen.
Yes.
So I would say to you that we are a resource.
Absolutely.
What that means is that we can be a support system to those individuals. And I want to stress that because sometimes we're quick to refer them somewhere else, but let's start with them. Let's start with ourselves, you know, celebrating them when they've made a win. If they've been sober for 1 day, 2 days, a week, let's celebrate. You know, don't enable them, but encourage them.
Absolutely.
You know, and really making sure that we encourage them to have healthy routines, eating right, getting their sleep, drinking their water. All of those are things that we can walk alongside them and do. Go walking to reduce stress. You know, and then just really be patient with them for those setbacks. So we are a resource, and we should provide that support.
Absolutely, absolutely. There comes a time, though, when there is a need for clearly professional help, where the therapist, the drug addiction recovery specialist comes in. So the church should have a list of those resources in terms of agencies and resources in terms of individuals. That should be already part of the directory that we have in our local churches. Would you say that's the case?
So, you know, Pastor Hall, you make a very good point regarding resources in a directory. I believe that's something that we can work on developing within Southeastern Conference so that churches will have access to those resources. But I must say, you know, the church does have an important role, you know, and there's a fentanyl addiction crisis. Our role really is to show the love of Christ, support individuals on the journey, and also make sure that we can connect them to professional resources to help them on their journey. Yes, we want to save souls, but yes, we also want to save lives. There's still so much more to talk about the fentanyl crisis. I'm going to ask you to connect with us or join us on the next segment when we will talk about practical ways that the church can help during the fentanyl crisis.